unlike her, whose presence seemed to lower the worth of everything around her. The words sliced clean through the quiet disdain of the gathering and landed hard, right on my wife. I stood by and watched her, unmoved in the center of the room, chin high, not flinching. She looked victorious, like she'd finally torn off the disguise her rival wore. But she knew, oh, she knew, that the woman trying to shame her had weathered storms more brutal than glares and muttered judgments. I saw it then, the slight tremble of her shoulders, not from fear, but from fury suppressed too long. They had no idea who she truly was, and I didn't need them to. But when that woman brought uniformed officers just to coerce my wife into unlocking our shed, that was the spark. In that moment, something ignited that couldn't be undone, by me or anyone else. Life had always been simple here in Maple Grove Heights. I held a stable job as an accountant for a regional insurance firm. Nothing remarkable. My name's David Thompson, 38. My wife, Sarah, 34, had just joined me after securing a new role in law enforcement. One we kept deliberately vague. She needed to blend in. But blending in was made impossible by one person, Linda Hartwell. At 43, always perfectly styled, she ruled the neighborhood as president of the HOA, a title she wore like royalty. What we didn't know then was how far her thirst for control would take her, and how much it would cost us. On the surface, the neighborhood felt like a postcard. Pastel-painted Victorian homes, manicured flower beds, white fences aligned like soldiers. Linda even greeted us on move-in day with homemade brownies and a dazzling smile. "Welcome," she said warmly. "We just ask everyone to follow a few simple rules to keep our community lovely." Sounded fair. Basic upkeep. Nothing crazy. Then we decided to convert the old shed in the backyard. A quiet space, Sarah for woodworking, me for fixing up bikes. We followed every code. Got the permits. Thought we were safe. Linda had other plans. She arrived one afternoon, examining our new shed lock like it was a loaded weapon. "Any structural changes must be cleared by the HOA board," she said, her tone clipped. "City approval doesn't override community regulations." A week later, a letter landed in our mailbox. A $150 fine for our window trim. Navy blue, apparently a violation. Sarah flipped through the color guide we were given on move-in. Our exact shade was there, but it had vanished from the updated list. Turns out, Linda had revised the approved palette just days before our project. Conveniently removed several darker shades, including ours. She hadn't even notified all homeowners, just a select few. It was our first taste of her game, altering the rules after the fact. Selective enforcement. We weren't just breaking rules, we were being set up. Soon came another fine, $200 this time. Trash cans supposedly left out too long. Except the garbage truck had run late that day. Linda had snapped photos at 2 p.m., then reported us. When I called, she was icy. "Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson." But again, something didn't add up. I checked the documents and found she'd unilaterally changed the trash timeline, moved it from noon to 11 a.m., without telling residents. And again, the change applied only to a handful of homes, ours included. It became clear. We were being targeted. But why? We kept to ourselves. No noise complaints. No conflicts. Nothing to provoke this. But Linda wasn't just enforcing rules. She was inventing them. And she wasn't done. By the second month, she declared all auxiliary structures must be inspected for safety compliance. She showed up with 3 HOA board members, demanding to enter our shed. "No," Sarah said firmly. "It's private property. You don't have the authority." Linda turned red. "You signed the HOA agreement. That means we can inspect when needed." But when asked to point out the exact clause, she faltered. Because there wasn't one. The agreement only allowed exterior checks for visible issues, not entry into personal spaces. She'd been bluffing. I started to wonder, how many other homeowners had she bullied into submission? How much of her authority was just noise and intimidation? Then it got darker. She started a whisper campaign, subtle, precise, spreading rumors that we were uncooperative, that something illegal was happening inside our shed. Neighbors stopped waving. Invitations stopped coming. One day, Mrs. Patterson, our elderly next-door neighbor, crossed the street to avoid Sarah. And when she finally spoke, she looked scared. "I'm sorry," she said, "but Linda told us you were dangerous, that you refused a safety inspection, that you were hostile to the board." She believed it. They all did. Linda had turned fear into a weapon and trust into a leash. It all led to that moment. The police, the demand to open the shed, the neighborhood watching, and Sarah standing tall in the middle of it all, her hands steady, her voice quiet but unyielding. That moment wasn't the climax. It was just the beginning. At the monthly homeowner meeting, Linda took her place at the front of the community hall, clutching a bulging binder. She began calling out names like a judge reading off charges. David and Sarah Thompson have repeatedly failed to meet neighborhood standards, ignored essential safety measures, and displayed open hostility toward residents and leadership. She announced loudly to the full room, her voice sharp and commanding, like a closing argument in a courtroom. Perhaps they'd be better suited to a neighborhood more aligned with their personal conduct. Soft murmurs rippled through the crowd. People we once shared barbecues and morning greetings with were now nodding in agreement, accepting her words without question. Sarah gripped my hand so tightly I could feel the bones press together. Rage rolled off her like heat from sun-baked asphalt. But she didn't speak. Her eyes were locked forward, her jaw set like stone. I didn't know it then, but she was holding back for a reason. Waiting, plotting. That night, restless and ashamed after being publicly shamed, I dove into Linda Hartwell's background. What I found chilled me to the core. Turns out, this wasn't her first time leading a homeowners association. She held the same position in her last neighborhood, until several families filed suit against her for harassment, inconsistent enforcement, and misuse of authority. The case had been quietly settled out of court, but the legal documents still existed, showing a pattern nearly identical to what we were facing now. She was forced to resign and disappear from that community. Somehow, she'd buried that history when she applied for her role in Maple Grove Heights. It got worse. Records showed she'd funneled small sums from the HOA's repair budget into her husband's landscaping business, for services that were never provided. It had all been swept under the rug in the settlement, but the trail was still there for anyone who knew how to search. Linda wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a seasoned manipulator using her role to benefit herself. And there was still one last detail I uncovered. Something that made her vendetta against us make perfect, terrible sense. After that disastrous meeting, Sarah and I agreed we weren't going to let this slide. The following morning, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her laptop glowing and piles of legal papers surrounding her like a war map. "David," she said, meeting my eyes with a look of iron I'd never seen before, "she's broken more than a dozen laws just in the last 2 months. We're done playing nice." She showed me how to collect admissible evidence, how to legally record calls, timestamp files, and archive emails in ways that could stand up in court. I assumed she'd picked it up from research. As an accountant, I began combing through HOA budgets. What I found was damning. Payments totaling $3,000 had been made to Linda's husband's company for yard work that clearly never happened. Fake invoices, backdated job orders. It was a clear scheme to siphon funds into their pockets. We thought we had her. We were ready to present everything at the next meeting. But the night before, Linda beat us to the punch. She announced there'd been a clerical error, claimed to have already reimbursed the HOA, and presented receipts, bank transfers, and a signed statement from her husband's firm calling it a misunderstanding. Everything we'd built was suddenly worthless. "She knew," Sarah muttered, stunned. "Someone told her exactly what we were going to reveal." And then, just as we were regrouping, an unexpected ally reached out. Tom Bradley, another board member and a senior accountant at a law firm downtown. He arranged a quiet meetup at a cafe away from prying eyes. Over coffee, he told us he'd been monitoring Linda's behavior for months. "She's done this to at least 3 families in the past year," he said, voice low and cautious. "I've been compiling evidence, but I couldn't act alone." Tom handed us internal emails showing Linda changing HOA policies without notice, manipulating votes, and targeting residents she felt disrespected her. For the first time in weeks, we felt hopeful. That hope didn't last. A week later, Linda called me directly. Her voice was smug and saccharine. "David," she said sweetly, "I just had the most enlightening chat with Tom Bradley. It seems you've been busy spreading false rumors about me." I froze. Tom had never been on our side. He was her informant all along, reporting which neighbors were unhappy with her so she could silence them before they became threats. The betrayal cut deep, but it also revealed something else. Linda wasn't just cunning. She was scared. Scared enough to plant a spy. Linda's grip on the neighborhood ran deeper than we'd ever realized. She had cultivated alliances over the years, some built on favors, others on fear. People either owed her something or were terrified of ending up in her crosshairs. We weren't just up against a person. We were up against a well-rooted system built on manipulation and intimidation. But Sarah didn't flinch. In fact, she seemed almost galvanized by it. Her focus sharpened, her strategy shifted. "We need a new approach," she said with a clarity that startled me. "Going after her head-on won't work. We need to let her unravel on her own." It was impressive, too impressive. She employed investigative tactics far beyond what you'd expect from someone who just skimmed a few articles online. But I didn't ask questions. I was too caught up in the fight. We enlisted the help of Mrs. Eleanor Watson, a 78-year-old retired court stenographer who lived down the street. Linda had harassed her too. Over her mailbox height, her bushes, petty things. But Eleanor was sharper than anyone gave her credit for. "She thinks I'm just some senile relic," Eleanor chuckled as she showed us her files. "But I spent over 3 decades recording court proceedings. I know what kind of evidence actually sticks." Her records were airtight. Every rule change, every instance of biased enforcement, every procedural misstep. Eleanor had it all logged, cross-referenced, dated, and signed. With her documentation, the recordings Sarah and I had collected, and the financial inconsistencies we'd uncovered, we were building a case Linda couldn't dodge. Then Eleanor unearthed the key that tied everything together. In the HOA records, she found documents containing forged signatures, Linda's attempt to fabricate support for rule changes that had never been properly approved. That explained the sudden shifts in policy, the uneven enforcement, the convenient mistakes. Sarah, cautious about revealing her own background, quietly consulted a financial crimes detective. He confirmed that forging signatures on official HOA documents was a felony. Serious charges. Jail time was on the table. "We've got her," Sarah said, her smile cold and calculated. I should have recognized it then. Should have known that I was starting to see a side of my wife I didn't fully understand. To push things to a breaking point, Sarah and I set up what we called a controlled detonation. We leaked word through strategic channels that we were considering moving away, unable to handle the harassment any longer. It was bait and Linda bit. She called for a special emergency HOA meeting, positioning it as her moment of triumph. She even brought in a lawyer, intending to make an example out of us. The meeting was packed. Residents lined the walls, drawn in by the tension and the promise of a showdown. Linda had been preparing them for this moment, framing herself as the community's last line of defense against our supposed disruption. But what she didn't know was that Eleanor had set up a live stream. Everything about to unfold would be captured and preserved, impossible to deny or bury. Linda opened the meeting like a seasoned litigator, projecting concern and authority. "I have attempted to cooperate with the Thompsons," she declared, clutching a thick folder. "But they have continuously resisted community standards, ignored reasonable safety inspections, and contributed to a toxic environment." Her voice carried across the room, and for a moment, she had them. There were nods, murmurs of agreement. Then I stood. "Mrs. Hartwell," I said, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, "I'd like to ask a few questions about these supposed violations." Heads turned. I pulled out our folder, thick with our own documentation. Why was the approved paint chart amended a week after we repainted our home? And why was the update communicated only to select residents? Her face tightened. "That update was necessary to ensure aesthetic harmony," she replied, but the confidence had cracked. And the trash collection schedule. Why was it changed from noon to 11 without any formal notice? Pressed. The audience began to stir, shifting from passive listeners to skeptical observers. Then Sarah stood, and everything changed. Her presence alone silenced the room. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, voice like steel, "I have recorded calls of you threatening residents who express support for us. Do these sound like the words of someone committed to a peaceful community?" She played the audio, Linda's voice, unmistakable. "Anyone siding with the Thompsons will be watched closely by the board." Murmurs turned into gasps. Then Eleanor rose, steady despite her age, holding up her folder like a shield. "I've documented 47 instances of improper enforcement and procedural violations," she said. "All verified, all logged." Linda's composure slipped further. "She doesn't understand the complexities of HOA governance," she stammered. "This is all being blown out of proportion by people unwilling to follow the rules." But her voice trembled now. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably beside her. The live stream was still running. People were recording with their phones. No way out. And yet, something still didn't make sense. Why she'd come after us so hard. Why she had risked everything. The answer would come soon enough. And it would change everything I thought I knew about this war we were fighting, and about my wife. Linda made a critical mistake, the one that would ultimately be her undoing. With her face flushed from fury, she rose abruptly and pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. "I already called the police to check their shed. If they've got nothing to hide, why won't they just open it?" she yelled, her voice cracking under the weight of frustration and anger. "There's something illegal in there, and I will prove it." A heavy silence took over the room. Then a voice from the back door cut through the tension like a knife. Calm, composed, and unmistakably authoritative. "What you're demanding is completely unlawful." Heads turned as Sergeant Mike Rodriguez entered, flanked by 2 uniformed officers, the same ones Linda had sent to our home earlier that day. Their timing wasn't accidental. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, his presence quieting every whisper in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a measured voice, "allow me to introduce our town's new police chief, Chief Sarah Thompson." The stillness was deafening. You could hear nothing but the shift of stunned breaths. Linda's expression collapsed into shock. Her mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. No sound came out. She looked at Sarah as if she'd seen a ghost. Sarah stood, and suddenly everything made sense. The sharp legal mind, the calm confidence, the way she had handled every confrontation. All the pieces clicked into place. In an even, official tone, Sarah addressed the room. "Mrs. Hartwell, your insistence on searching private property without due process violates constitutional protections under the Fourth Amendment. Using law enforcement for personal vendettas is a gross misuse of emergency services. And forging signatures on HOA documents constitutes fraud under state law." The room shifted instantly. Suspicion turned to shame, but not toward us. Linda, once seen as a pillar of authority, now looked small and cornered. Tom Bradley, her closest ally, began inching toward the exit, until Sergeant Rodriguez raised a hand for him to stay where he was. And just as things reached their boiling point, Linda broke. She laughed. The sound was unhinged, bitter, and twisted with hate. "You really thought this was about HOA rules?" she hissed. Her calm was gone, her mask shattered. "I knew who you were the day you moved in, Sarah Thompson. You think I picked you at random?" She laughed again, dry and sharp. "My husband, Robert Hartwell, was arrested in your last precinct. You were the officer who built the case against him. He lost everything because of you. Now it was clear this wasn't just petty neighborhood politics. This was revenge, festering over years, now unraveling in front of a live-streaming camera watched by hundreds." Sarah didn't flinch. Her voice was steady. "Robert Hartwell stole $50,000 from a community fund meant to build a youth center. He chose his actions, not me." The officers moved in. Linda Hartwell was arrested right there, in the same meeting where she tried to ruin us. The charges were serious. Forgery, abuse of power, misuse of law enforcement, criminal harassment. Tom Bradley, too, was brought in for questioning, and soon others came forward, revealing the full extent of their manipulation. Eleanor's live broadcast had gone viral. Tens of thousands of people watched as justice played out in real time. 3 weeks later, Linda was sentenced. 18 months of probation, $25,000 in restitution. A permanent ban from holding any position within the HOA. The judge called her actions a deliberate and malicious misuse of community authority. Tom Bradley avoided jail in exchange for testimony but lost any remaining trust or respect. His name became synonymous with betrayal. Eleanor Watson was elected interim HOA president. Her first act? She tossed out Linda's absurd 47-page rulebook and replaced it with a clear, fair 8-page guide. Rules now had a purpose: to support the community, not to control it. From then on, no single person could hold unchecked power. Every decision required consensus. Public notice was mandatory, and any resident could trigger a third-party review. That first meeting under Eleanor's leadership was filled with apologies. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid us now approached with open hands and red faces. Mrs. Patterson, who had once sneered at Sarah, showed up with an apple pie and tears in her eyes. "I let myself believe the worst," she said. "I'm so sorry. You both deserved better from all of us." Sarah declined the offer to lead the HOA permanently. "My duty's to protect this entire town," she said. "This community deserves someone focused only on them." The neighborhood later voted to rename the small public garden after Sarah and Eleanor. ***, the Thompson-Watson Garden ***. A quiet, beautiful tribute to two women who stood against injustice. 6 months on, our workshop is now everything we dreamed of: open, bright, creative. From its window, I can see Sarah tending our flower beds. Bright red tulips line the fence, the same color Linda once banned for being too loud. Now they bloom proudly in both our yard and the garden that bears Sarah's name. Eleanor had helped plant them and said it best: "These will remind us that beauty and justice will always push through, no matter who tries to bury them." Above my workbench hangs a framed photo from that unforgettable day. Sarah in uniform, Eleanor holding her files, and me, standing proudly beside my wife. In the background, a room full of neighbors are caught in the moment their eyes were opened. I look at that photo often. It reminds me that you should never underestimate quiet people. You should never abuse power to settle personal scores. And you should never mistake silence for weakness. Sarah remains our town's police chief, known and respected by everyone now. And me? I'm still just an accountant, but I've learned that ordinary people can make an extraordinary impact when they speak up for what's right, especially when they stand beside someone who refuses to back down. And every spring, when those tulips bloom again, they remind all of us: truth always finds the light. Justice always finds its ground. And no amount of control can suppress a community that's rediscovered its strength.